Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Amna Husain, board certified pediatrician, board certified lactation consultant, and mom to two girls, and today is going to be a little bit more of a personal episode. One of my most popular videos on my channel is when I talked about my own experience being COVID positive while being pregnant. I contracted COVID-19 in my first trimester while pregnant with my now 10-month-old baby back in 2020 when vaccines still weren't available. We contracted it around actually November 2020. Thereafter, I went on to get the vaccine in December of 2020 was my first dose. My second dose was in January of 2021. And later on, I got boosted in November of 2021 while I was still nursing baby. I say all this to say, after doing all that, she had the audacity to go get COVID. I'm serious. So we are just coming off the heels a couple of weeks ago of my baby testing COVID positive. Thankfully, she was the only one in the household affected. We were able to take some really great measures, which I'll elaborate on. But I know a lot of families have asked me to share my experience, especially after sharing the experience of when I was COVID positive in pregnancy. So if this is helpful to you, I'd love to share. So to give some background, when my husband and I contracted COVID-19 in November 2020, it was the Delta strain. At that time, my daughter, who is now 4, was turning 3 and also got ill. Thankfully, her course was quite mild. It was about a day and a half of fever symptoms, and she really recovered pretty well. Now, this might be the common narrative that you hear amongst children. I'm a pediatrician, and I have to say commonly that is what we see. However, I don't have a crystal ball to predict which child is going to have more severe symptoms. And in this case, it was my little one. My 10-month-old ended up developing more severe symptoms. This was likely not the same variant, but from what we do know, that the variants that have developed since 2022, they have seemed to be more mild than what we saw initial on in 2020 and then what we saw with Delta. Unfortunately, this strain or this illness, this virus, the way it affected my little one, it was a little bit more severe, as I've mentioned. So we dealt with some persistently high fevers. Now, not every fever needs to be treated. And side note, if you have questions about fevers or would like me to make a video busting common myths when it comes to fevers and what you need to know, just comment below. Let me know what questions you have and I'll definitely make another video for you guys. But in this case, the fever definitely did need to be treated for her because it was making her uncomfortable. Not to mention, she was beginning to refuse fluids. Really, the dehydration was what was worrying my medical mom brain. Well, it finally happened. Baby tested COVID positive. Our days have been filled with masking constantly around her, daily testing, wiping down everything she puts her mouth on or touches, which frankly has been a feat. Intently watching her hydration status, especially early on in the illness when we were dealing with fluid refusal. Trying to maintain some semblance of distance between the two girls. Around the clock, Tylenol and Motrin for some very persistent fevers. Constant hand washing. So those were the first couple of days of the illness. So I would say day 1, she really started out with a fever and was still kind of happy, but a little bit more tired, obviously with the fever. And then it really increased in pace. And day 2, we saw fever, we saw refusal to drink fluids, we saw a lot of congestion. Day 3, the refusal to drink fluids got much worse, and really the dehydration was starting to catch up to her. By the morning of day 4, I would say that I was really on the cusp of taking her to the ER for IV fluids. Thankfully, she was able to start taking more fluids by mouth, and we were kind of through the worst of things. And I felt that day 5, she was starting to kind of regain some of that energy again. Between that and the constant disinfecting, to be honest, my hands are pretty raw. Cuddles. So many cuddles. I actually got good at doing pretty much everything one-handed. Timing meals apart from the baby to eliminate any mask off time around her. Honestly, we tried everything to keep it from spreading through the house, including bribing Asia to weigh her KN95-round baby all the time. Baby's course was also complicated by weight loss, pneumonia, diarrhea, and hence a diaper rash. Teamwork allowed us to get through this week in literally survival mode. And thankfully she's okay now, but this wasn't a minor cold. Personally, I can't wait to get her vaccinated so this doesn't make her severely ill again. However, by day 8, now we are still in her quarantine period. She was still actually testing positive on rapid antigens as well. She began to develop a fever again. And now her symptoms had actually worsened and she developed a pneumonia. This isn't necessarily uncommon, but this doesn't happen with every COVID infection. This can happen with some viral infections, however. And with the pneumonia-like symptoms, she again had a fever. She did have some difficulty breathing, but not to the point where we had to take her to the emergency room, thankfully. With viral pneumonias, you typically do supportive care, and that means you manage the symptoms. Because she wasn't having too much difficulty breathing, we were able to manage her at home, and she didn't have fevers for too long after she developed the pneumonia. However, in the last couple of days before her quarantine period was up, she did begin to have some diarrhea. And that was really difficult for her. She developed a diaper rash as well, even though we were on top of diaper changes. And if you have questions about how to manage a diaper rash, make sure you refer back to my old video on my tips for preventing a diaper rash. So what was the hardest part for me as a mom? Okay, well, back in 2020, my husband got it and I was pregnant and trying to take care of an almost 3-year-old. And I have to say that when I ended up testing positive, it was almost like a relief because I could un-isolate my husband and have some help taking care of my daughter. Unfortunately, even though we were masking, she ended up getting sick too, but it was kind of nice because she wasn't that ill and we could just pop Lion King on and, lounge on the couch together. This was very different because we tried to keep the two of them separate. So such is the plague of the working mom. I tried to keep Asia, my oldest one, separate from the baby because I didn't want her to not only get ill, but I also really couldn't afford to take more time off of work. So I tried my best to really keep her separate. That meant bribing her to wear KN95s. That meant trying to keep her in separate rooms during meal times with the other parent, or trying to play with other toys, constantly sanitizing anything the baby washed. Really, it was a very difficult feat, and thankfully she remained negative and the rest of us remained negative as well. And I have to say we made it through, but honestly there was teamwork, there was a lot of planning involved. There were days that I didn't really eat lunch till like 3 hours later because I didn't want to take my mask off around the baby. Lots of tears, lots of physical, mental, and just emotional exhaustion. But this virus is really no joke, so you're not only worrying about a sick baby, but you're also worrying about trying to spread it to others. You're trying to think about time off with work. You're trying to think about, how to really manage the symptoms and the infectious disease part of it. I have to say a lot of people have asked me, even after this illness, would I consider vaccinating my daughter because now she has natural immunity? And the answer is 100% yes. Because natural immunity is hard to predict. We don't know how long those antibodies are going to last. Not to mention, natural immunity can be risky. In this situation, you've already heard me say that I might take her to the hospital if she developed respiratory distress, if she was dehydrated, and neither of those happen when you get a vaccine. So that's my personal take on it. If you have questions, feel free to ask them below. Thankfully, we're through this now, but I have to say that this experience has been a lot to take on for me and just so different than what Delta was like for our family back in 2020, before any of us were really vaccinated.